To put it carefully, most of these people followed a not very mainstream religion. So, you have Catholics, Protestants, all sorts of religions. These people, most of them, were Luciferians. And then you can say, religion is a fairy tale, God doesn't exist, none of that is real. Well, for these people, it is truth and reality. And they served something immaterial, what they called Lucifer.
You know, this is a very grave topic of which most people know nothing, absolutely nothing. But yet the devotees of this, I suppose you call it religion, are literally all around us. And people just laugh and snicker because they honestly can't fathom that there is evil in the human psyche and that it's alive and kicking all around us. One very important fact that must first be made clear in people's minds is that evil does indeed exist. Establishment propaganda has spent immense time, effort, and capital attempting to condition society into believing that evil is nothing more than a social construct, an opinion. Evil is supposedly in the eye of the beholder, a product of religious conditioning. This is a falsehood. Just like concepts of beauty, concepts of evil are inherent in our psyches from birth. The eye of the beholder is irrelevant. Okay, so you got some old lady, and you know most of her teeth are gone, and she dips snuff and got old tobacco breath, and she's all disheveled, and she's got stringy hair, and pimples on her and all that. And, there's not a place in the world somebody like that would be considered beautiful, because we all know what beauty is. And it's the same thing with evil. It's a universal concept. It's an archetype. An archetype is a memory that we're born with, and we'll get into that with Mr. Carl Jung next.
Let's look how this doctrine influences our life. Here we have the planet Earth, where according to the Luciferian doctrine, the worldly affairs are ruled by the Lord Lucifer. Now, as spiritual beings, we come from the spiritual worlds to incarnate for a very short lifespan here on Earth. Most of us do it to clear up past karma, or eventually return to a higher spiritual sphere, or return even to our spiritual home from where we all came. But if we forget who we are, or don't believe in life before or after death, we can easily be tempted to dedicate our life to accumulation of riches, power, fame, and other stuff that makes us important and special. We might even fall for some New Age guru teachings promising unbridled riches and abundance. Our purpose here is to develop the kingdom within, and not the kingdom without. But if we want worldly riches, our god and orientation would naturally be this guy here, Lucifer, the only god of our planet, as Madame Blavatsky put it. He rules the worldly affairs, and with him many heads of politics, military, finance, and industry. But it does come with a hefty price. Anybody who aligns himself with this god of the world to obtain riches, power, fame, and so on, enters a Faustian bargain. Chances are they will become his servant after their physical death. Such energies are never given for free. Now, in addition, the Luciferian doctrine also states that we are God, which is also a very popular belief among some New Age teachings. The danger is that when we think we are God, we are convinced we can get away with anything. We feel that we are only accountable for our actions to ourselves. In other words, we could harm or even kill somebody and justify it with something that simply had to be done, without any guilt or remorse, and totally ignoring that such an action has created an enormous karma for our soul. Somebody who thinks he is God does not feel accountable to anybody else except himself. Now finally, let's look around this world and see how powerful the Luciferian influence already is.
Yeah, that woman I just described, she wasn't hypothetical. She was my second grade teacher, Miss Pipkin. I hope off in the great beyond she hears me talking too, man. She was something else. She used to get a big old wad of chewing gum and roll it in some Scotch snuff and chew it in class. Oh, my goodness. Now, see, just about everybody would think that was awful. And we're going to get into that right now. Carl Jung, a famous psychiatrist. I guess he was a psychiatrist, maybe just a psychologist. I'm not really sure. However, he was great and he was famous, and he did a lot of pioneering research into what he called the collective unconsciousness. He discovered that we all have a collective unconsciousness. We have memories that we're born with and that we all share. He called them archetypes. Anyway, as the work of Carl Jung showed, all human beings, no matter where in the world they are born, from the most isolated tribe in the Amazon to the largest metropolis in America, carry the same archetypal symbols in their psyche. That is to say, we all have same psychological elements in our minds, regardless of environment. And this is true. It's established. It's true. I used to try talking about this concept to my classes, and all these other old granny grunt married spinster teachers just thought it was awful, man. They would spare no expense to try to get me for teaching the collective unconsciousness in class. But, you know, they're the ignoramuses, not me. Anyhow, the undeniable existence of the human conscience suggests that we are born with an understanding of duality, meaning, just as Jung discovered, our psyches contain inherent concepts of good and evil that influence our decisions and reactions. Jung referred to evil or psychologically destructive impulses as the personal shadow, or just a shadow, and the collective shadow. And you know, the Bible, if you believe that, I mean, who was it? I think it was Paul. He said that everyone had the laws of God written on their heart. So, you know, we all know what it is. We know what's going on. And we're going to continue, and you're going to see that we all don't know what's going on.
And I also was in contact with those circles, only I laughed at it because to me they were just clients. So, I went to places called Churches of Satan.
So now we are talking about Satanism.
Yes. So, I visited these churches, just as a visitor, dropped by. And then they were doing their holy mass with naked woman and liquor and stuff. And it just amused me.
In any case, there is a contingent of people in the world who do not get it. They just don't get it. A small percentage of the population that is born without conscience, or that finds it easy to ignore conscience. As mentioned earlier, there is a group of people in the world who do not see good and evil the way most of us do. Their psyche functions in a completely different way without the filter of conscience. These people exhibit the traits of narcissistic sociopaths. Full-blown, high-level narcissistic sociopaths represent 1 to 5% of the total human population, and most of them are born, not made by their environment. Also, 5% to 10% of the people hold latent traits of either narcissism or sociopathy that generally can only arise to the surface in an unstable crisis environment. Okay, I got that from a paper I read. I'm putting a link, or not a link, but a citation at the end to let you go look at it. This guy's wrong. a sociopath and a psychopath aren't the same thing. A psychopath is born without conscience, without empathy. They're born that way. They will live their whole lives like that. They will die like that. And there is absolutely nothing in the world that can change it. That's who they are. It's in their genes. Now, a sociopath is a learned state of being. And, if you're a sociopath, you can, if you realize the problem, you can unlearn it and bring yourself back to the light. Okay? But see, also, the corollary of that is also correct. You can make yourself into a sociopath if you choose, if you try. All you have to do is scald your conscience to the point that nothing bothers you anymore. People who have been through war see all kinds of death and destruction. They see hardship and it doesn't really bother them that much. They see hardship in their fellow man and it just doesn't really bother them very much because they're so inured to it. So anyway, that's the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. And by the way, there are more of them than that as well. I think probably, what is it? I've heard 5% psychopaths, and then the sociopaths would be probably 5%. And see, but that's, like I say, when you consider that you can make yourself into a sociopath, the percentages can be kind of problematic, I would think. But anyway, let's continue on to the Luciferians.
The purpose of the whole thing, eventually, in that world, is that they have everybody in their pocket. You need to be susceptible to blackmail. And blackmailing me proved to be very hard if I look back on it. They wanted to do that through those children. And that broke me.
You've got 5% psychopath, 5% sociopath, and 5% narcissist. That's 15% of the population. Compare that to the black population of 13%, and you get an idea of the relative proportions of these people to the population overall. Now, of course, naturally, I'm not saying that black people are sociopaths. I'm saying that their numbers are comparable. But see, also, there are going to be certain areas where they're not just 15%, where they're almost 90% or 80%, and typically the more powerful the position, the more likely it is you're going to find these people. One time, I walked into a room at the University of Oklahoma College of Law, and I swear to God, it was bunch of students and professors and a Supreme Court justice who was visiting, and the darkness that emanated from that room was nauseating. I could barely stand to be in the room. It was so bad. So anyway, that gives you an idea. Police officers, mental health professions, you name it. But anyway, there is an ideology or system of belief that argues for the exact opposite of what conscience tells us is good, and that system is Luciferianism. In fact, Luciferianism appears to be the source of influence for most existing destructive isms in our society today, including socialism and globalism. It is my theory that Luciferianism is a religion or cult designed by sociopathic narcissists for the benefit of sociopathic narcissists. So in other words, a bunch of psychopaths got together and made up a religion to appeal to other psychopaths. And by the way, like I said, this is a quote from a paper that I've read, and the citation's in the back. Anyway, there are some foundational beliefs that Luciferians do openly admit to. First and foremost, the goal of Luciferianism is to attain godhood. That is to say, they believe that some human beings have the capacity to become gods through the accumulation of knowledge. Now, see, these people, they're not ashamed of their not having a conscience. To them, they call that strength. They can do anything to anyone, anytime, because they're strong, as if that's what strength is.
If we are talking about the worst things that I have experienced, I just told you about things that made the freezer glitch. My conscience started to show itself. Let's put it this way. I was training to become a psychopath and I failed. I did not complete the training and didn't become a psychopath. My conscience came back, and the most difficult part for me was
Okay, so we've talked about how people could force themselves to make themselves into sociopaths. But how would you do that? How? Well, we're going to look at that. Luciferianism could attract people toward amoral or antisocial behavior using its rejection of dogma as a justification for their actions. Someone with sociopathic tendencies might twist the idea of self-realization into a rationale for harming others without guilt, claiming it's part of their personal evolution. Someone could repeatedly engage in acts of harm and force themselves to ignore the fallout. By normalizing these behaviors and refusing to reflect on their impact, they might dull any natural regret or shame. So in other words, if you want to make yourself into a sociopath, what you do is you do bad things. You do the most horrid things to people, and you just do them deliberately, and then you do them over and over and over again, and then gradually you'll just become used to it, and there you'll be, a sociopath. You won't give a shit about anybody. You won't have any empathy, and in the minds of many, that's making oneself strong. I can't emphasize that enough. These people consider psychopathy, sociopathy as strength, and they think it's a desirable trait. And so, you get into all kinds of nasty stuff. Torture, if you get into the highest levels, and I'm putting in some videos that give you a glimpse of that, you're talking about, torturing people and sacrificing people and eating people. Oh, yeah, that's a really good one. That's a good way to scald your conscience. So, you just got to take it with a grain of salt whenever you see anybody with any clout in society, and recognize that they're not all praying to the devil, and they're not all, doing nasty shit, but a lot of them are, and even if they're not, that doesn't mean they're not sociopaths anyway.
But then at some point, I was invited, which is why I'm telling you all this, to participate in sacrifices abroad. That was the breaking point. Children.
You were asked to do that?
Yes. And I couldn't do
And sooner
that.
or later, whenever you're talking about topics like this, sooner or later it comes around to Helena Blavatsky and her theosophy religion that she created. And it was literally Luciferianism. Luciferianism is also prevalent in globalist institutions. For example, the UN seems to be highly involved in the ideology through groups like the Lucis Trust. Now, the Lucis Trust used to be called the Lucifer Trust, and it was run by Blavatsky, and then later on Alice Bailey took over the movement from Blavatsky when she died. But anyway, in the ideology through groups like Lucis Trust, a publishing house founded by Alice Bailey, an avid promoter of Luciferianism, who also owned the Lucifer Publishing Company. Lucis Trust was originally headquartered at the UN building in New York and still runs a private library of occult books out of the UN today. Now, I hadn't heard about the library before. However, they have a little chapel there in the United Nations. It's the only religious group in the world that actually has a visible permanent location there in the United Nations building. So that should tell you something. Luciferians approach global governments like they do everything else, with heavy propaganda spin. The goal must be pitched to the public through the idea of protecting the earth. In other words, environmentalism was the key to convincing the masses of the need for total centralization of power into the hands of globalist institutions. Luciferian ideals are sugar-coated in a host of flowery and noble-sounding motifs. And yeah, the environmental movement is number one. Communism, socialism, I mean, you name it. Anything that tends to centralize power is the kind of thing that they're going to like, because it enables them to have direct control over folks. But anyway, it's not just necessarily in high places. I've had colleagues, teachers, of whom I have no doubt, they just, whenever you think wokey dokey, think this, and it's usually just the same thing. Most of them probably don't know it. They don't know they're Luciferians, but some of them do, and boy, I've known a few who have. Anyway, I hope you learned something.
So this is pertinent. All this made me believe, because I realized there was more to life than meets the eye. There is a whole invisible world. It is real.
Sich die Natur